Hey y'all! This video is on the art of leadership, which is my model of how to lead, how I want to lead, how I want to follow others, maybe based a little bit on a dislike of authority, but also based on the idea that leadership today, I think, is very different than what it's been in the past. Um, a friend of mine likes to say that leadership can be predict and control or sense and respond. And what companies and leaders, I think, used to do is they used to say, okay, I'm going to come in with this plan. We're going to introduce ourselves. We're going to, all say something about how we're doing. We're going to get to the agenda. We're going to have action steps we're going to complete. That would be a traditional meeting format. But what do you do if you're a leader and you come into the room and you start the meeting and in the check-in, someone bursts out crying? Or a kind of internal conflict flares up between two people and you can feel it in the room and everyone's a little bit uncomfortable. Do you ignore it? Do you address it? Like, what then? And what happens to your agenda if you do that? Or if you're on one agenda item and it starts going really long, what do you do with the others? So this is kind of like an instrumental example. It gets more complicated when we look at groups that have many different cultures, many different types of individuals, different needs, different desires. When I go into a training, often I find that I have an idea of what I want to teach, but if it's not what the group wants to learn, I start getting pushback. People start not answering questions, or they start kind of talking to each other behind my back or checking out during discussions. I've even had people stage outright revolts. So I've had to learn, especially working in a more expressive type of group, how do I sense and respond? How do I lead when in chaotic and uncertain and creative environments? And the reason I want to teach this is I think that's most of the environments that we work in these days. It's very hard to actually predict a lot of the time what's going to happen next. Technology changes so quickly. There's so many different cultures bumping into each other in our groups. People are expecting to have more self-expression and more fulfillment. So this model helps address those questions. It's called the art of leadership. The art is authentic, responsive, and transparent. I'll go through each of these in turn. Authentic, in my definition, means basically selfish. And the benefit of this is I know, well, at least some of the time, I know what I want. I can predict that a little bit better than what the group wants, right? Because I'm kind of guessing when it comes to other people. So authentic is, I want this, let's all do that. Or here's what I'm feeling and sensing. Is that true for y'all? Example of this, I am quite nervous usually when I start leading groups, especially if I'm doing them online. There's this kind of like, whoa, all of a sudden there's a bunch of people on my screen, or there's a bunch of people in this room. And I haven't settled in yet. And now y'all are looking at me and expecting me to lead something. Great. I could lead from that place of a little bit of like discombobulation, uncertainty, but it's going to take my groups a while to settle in if I do it. And it's going to take me a while to settle in. And I'm honestly not going to enjoy the first 10 to 20 minutes of whatever I'm doing. And people might not trust me as much because they notice I'm a little bit on edge. So something I do is when I notice it, I start the groups with a meditation. I say, okay, everyone, the first thing we're going to do is close our eyes. Take a breath. Feel into your body. And internally, I'm kind of like, okay, got this. And come back to center, and then open your eyes. And by the time I've led that meditation, I'm more grounded, and the group is too. But it came from my own selfish need and desire to do that. Now, one thing I'll say about these principles is if you take any of them independently, you're going to be unbalanced as a leader. If the only thing you're doing is responding to your own selfish desire, then likely the groups that you're leading are going to feel unbalanced, basically. Like, wow, we're getting like kind of pulled in this direction and then this direction based on what you want to lead. And we had a plan, but now you're throwing it out the window because you want to emotionally process with the group. Like, what? So we'll talk about the other two that are kind of the balances to this. But one other benefit to selfish leadership, authentic leadership, is that when we lead, I think we lead. Basically, it's been shown that we have brain neurons in three different parts of our body. We have them in our brain, of course. We also have them in our heart, and we have them in our stomach. So when you get a feeling in your gut, that's actually something real. You're sensing something. And when you feel something in your heart, which is pretty cool, I think. And so if I cut off access to those, if I'm only leading from my plan, which is likely from my brain, like maybe my heart had some, you know, role in creating the plan. But if I'm leading mostly from my head, then when something happens in the group and my intuition or my heart or my gut say, hey, something's up here, chances are I'm going to ignore it if I'm not listening, if I'm not being selfish. But if I'm listening to myself, if I'm taking the time to drop in with what is true for me, then I can actually get information from more sources that benefits my group. Okay, that's authentic. Second, responsive. And responsive leadership basically says that like nothing's ever static and authenticity is a commitment to truth. So I think I know where I want to head, but the group is telling me something else. There's an example of this I'll give. So I was once asked to facilitate a memorial. And at this time, I was, I believe, either 20 or 21. And the person who had died had been a member of the Austin Authentic community. And so his mom flew me out to Louisiana. And I had never seen a memorial before or been to one. Also, when I walked into the room to give the memorial, I assumed that, I'm an authentic relating facilitator. What they wanted was like must have been some sort of, connection between the attendees around the deceased. Well, when I walked into the room, what I found was a podium up at the front and a room full of 50 devout Christians expecting a minister. I was a 21-year-old Jew who had never been to memorial before. So I have this whole plan of what I'm going to do, this meditation, this quote I'm going to read, these exercises to help people connect. And I'm just like, okay, plan needs to change. So I get up to the front of the room and I made up something on the spot. That was a little brief intro, and I read the Hafiz quote that I had, which still felt relevant. And then I looked out at the room and I kind of went, okay, what's next? And I responded to the situation. I started, asking people to come up and speak about the deceased instead. And I didn't give the exercise or the long speech. And it was like a very uncomfortable place to be because I had no idea what to do. But if I'd had a model of I'm going to follow my plan come hell or high water, I think I would have lost the room and actually been pretty culturally inappropriate. So responsive leadership is the ability inside yourself to drop your attachment to what you expect to happen and instead respond to what is. One way I think of this is that leadership is both responsive and responsible. So you have a plan. You're willing to set a structure. When things need to change, rather than just kind of dropping the reins and being like, okay, room, go where you want to go, you're going to say, all right, like it seems like, I wanted to lead this grounding meditation, but everyone already seems connected with each other in high energy. So let's just go straight into talking about, what we're going to create with each other today. I'm not saying, wow, y'all seem high energy. Go ahead. Groups get chaotic when they don't know who's leading, or somebody else will step in and take up the leadership if you drop it. And so you have to stay responsible, or ideally you do, and you're also responsive to what's happening. Sometimes this is like called, or I think of it as the yin and the yang being responsible and the yin being responsive. Another way you can say this is hold your plan lightly and your intentions strongly. Yes, I'm reading off a bit of a script. I have notes. Responsive leadership. Respond to your notes. That was terrible. One last piece is awareness of group dynamics. So one of the biggest places that things change in groups is if you don't know about something that's happening under the surface, for instance, a conflict that people have with each other, or a certain group culture. If you don't know the words that group tends to use, the way they usually tend to bond, how they tend to talk with each other, how they tend to be. If you walk in a business suit to a room full of entrepreneurs in shirt sleeves, something like that. But there's also internal culture. There's people's ages and how they feel being older or younger than the rest of the group. There's ethnicity. There's how long people have been part of the group. And so all of these factors, you can't always know before you come into leadership. And that's one other reason why responsiveness is helpful. How safe do people feel? How connected do they feel? How creative are they? How much are they interacting with each other or with you? These are all things that you can respond to and track. Okay. Last, transparent. Transparent leadership means that you reveal what's going on for you. So something's happening for me right now. As I'm making this video, I feel excited about it. I feel kind of awkward that I think there were some background noises. There's somebody else in my house right now, and I'm having like a bit of distraction of like, do I refilm the video? Do I not? And now I feel more present saying that. The benefit of doing something like that is now all of a sudden you have context for why there was background noise. And I feel more grounded, and probably there's more trust between us. Vulnerability is probably one of the main leadership skills to have. And there's been a lot of research lately that's been backing this up. Brene Brown's books, research on psychological safety. Transparency doesn't mean revealing everything, but it does mean that you reveal things that are majorly affecting you or affecting the group. Or if you're not sure what's going on, you can speak to it. One example of this is people will often go as deep as you do, as deep as the leader does, basically. So during examples, if I'm asking people to do an exercise on revealing, for instance, a sentence stem like, if you really knew me, you'd know, I'm going to go first and I'm going to set the tone for how I want other people to respond. I have a co-facilitator that when we do that phrase, that sentence stem for companies, he'll often talk about the death of his father and how that's influenced him. And you can just feel the room change and people get more honest about their experience. We respond differently to feeling than we do to thinking. So transparent leadership means being vulnerable and also revealing why you're doing things, because sometimes people won't want to follow the thing that you're doing, but they might be involved in the reason why you're doing it. Let me try to think of an example on the spot. If I'm leading a meeting and setting an agenda, then people might not want to go along with the agenda. They might be like, no, we know what we want to talk about. We just want to jump in. And so I'm getting pushback from the group, right? And in that moment, I can say, no, we're doing the agenda. But that's not responsive to the group. So a more transparent way of doing it might be to say, okay, I want to set the agenda because then as the leader, I'm going to feel more free to kind of like relax a little bit and not have to like, set the situation and constantly be asking y'all, okay, what do you want to do next? What do you want to do next? And also because then I can be sure that nobody's concerns get missed and we don't end the meeting with someone feeling like they didn't get heard. So would you all be willing to set an agenda from that place? Or can you think of some other way of meeting those needs of everyone getting heard and the leadership being more collaborative? And this is honestly like probably one of my top tactics for leadership is revealing your why, letting other people into it. It's harder for people to push back against a person than against an idea. So that's the art of leadership.